There's an old adage in sports that if you're not cheating, you are not trying. And I guess that means the Canadian women's national team is definitely trying. But what started as a small little spying scandal at the Olympics, which is just another instance of soccer leaning into the Olympic spirit, what started as that has now blown up into something far bigger than that has encompassed the entirety of the Canadian national, like the entirety of the Canadian Federation, having to have some sort of reckoning with the fact that they have a mastery of drones. If you're not familiar with what drones are, then welcome to the 21st century. Those little things you can fly around and use to, use to spy on stuff. You know, a little Spygate action. This sort of stuff happens in the U.S. all the time. Honestly, miss, when it was the old school stuff, Marcelo Bielsa just standing next to a tree with binoculars trying to watch somebody's training. But here we are trying to level things up. The first reporting that came out was basically that an assistant coach at the Canadian women's national team was being kicked off the roster after a spying scandal erupted. Essentially, Canada's opening match is against New Zealand. And whoever, this assistant coach and analyst, was caught flying a drone over New Zealand's practice. Now, on the surface, I'm just going to go ahead and say, this is dumb. Right? I don't understand this. Now, there are certain sports where spying on somebody's closed practice makes a lot of sense. Now, the only thing you would glean from spying on a soccer team, a football team's practice, is going to be set piece routines, right? Which is not nothing. Right, but the vast majority of that closed practice is going to be, different passing drills and maybe different little tactical stuff. But if you're not, if you're watching it, you're not necessarily going to know exactly what's going on unless you've got, you've planted bugs in their uniforms as well, so you can understand kind of what they're discussing and where they're looking in certain instances. So yeah, you'll be able to pick up a couple of set piece things, but it's not like you're going to gain groundbreaking information that's going to single-handedly win you the match. I mean, you could just watch their previous couple of matches and you can probably pick up 95% of what you'd be getting by flying a drone over their training in the first place, right? But still, this was the article, I think, a couple of days ago. We already have an Olympic scandal, and she's been sent away for spying. Also, New Zealand. New Zealand's 28th in the world. Canada are the reigning gold medalists. If you are going to roll the dice on getting caught spying, then this is probably not the game that you want to use up that magic card to do it. And it is... apparently they've been doing this for a while, so maybe they've got some quieter set of drones, but it's pretty hard to fly a drone over something and have nobody notice. The things are pretty loud. When we film Hidden Grounds on the main YouTube channel, my brother, who is a certified drone pilot or whatever you need to be in order to fly those dang things around, he flies those drones all over the place to get some cool B-roll shots or shots of me walking, super cool guy walk somewhere. And yeah, it's all, you can hear it. You can see it. It's like something darting around in the sky. But I really want to know how this analyst got caught. Did they see the drone in the way that I'm thinking? They see something moving around in the sky, or they hear it because the dang things are pretty loud, and they just pretend they don't notice it. And then they call like the New Zealand Secret Service, the New Zealand CIA, or, one of the coaches has just read too many spy novels and tracks the drone as they see it like getting called back to somewhere and finds the assistant coach of Canada sitting in their car trying to load the drone into their trunk. I just feel like it would be a really interesting story to learn how they actually caught this person in the first place. But once the person was caught, all of the dominoes started to fall. What it first sounded like was that they were just trying to use drones to spy during this particular match. Again, as much as I've covered, as stupid as it is, because I don't think that the cost-benefit analysis makes any sense at all here. Unfortunately, after a little bit more digging, CBS has actually uncovered the story. So a little over 72 hours before their matchup with the Canucks, which should be another name for the Canadians, the drone was spotted above the New Zealand squad's base in Saint Etienne. The incident was reported to police, so it was the police who uncovered that the operator of the spycraft, love the use of the word spycraft here, was a member of the Canadian support staff. This was then launched an investigation by the COC, uncovered a further drone incident 3 days earlier, leading to them removing 2 staff members from their setup. That would be the Canadian Federation there. Canadian soccer staff are also due to undergo mandatory ethics training. Now, I think that part is stupid because the only reason referees are required in the first place is because when you play a sport competitively, you have that drive to win that sport to the point that you might cheat the opponent, right? That's why referees are needed in the first place, right? That's why when a ball goes over the line in Sunday League, there's a giant debate about whether it went over the line or not if it was close. The goalkeeper doesn't just go, yeah, I think that went over the line too, we'll give him the goal, right? Like everybody's trying to win. This is a natural extension of that. It's why you have rules. If you get caught doing this, you should be punished because not only is it stupid, it's also cheating. It's obviously cheating and you should be punished for cheating. But I mean, if you're hiring people to try and win as many games as possible, you know, and the only thing that matters is winning, right, then mandatory ethics training seems a little weird, especially if you're doing mandatory ethics training for the people that haven't been fired related to this. Like, that feels dumb. If you're really just making the analysts the fall guys here, right, and then they get sent home and they lose their jobs or whatever, then why are we sending everybody else through an ethics course? You're just assuming they might have known about it? The person in question was Joseph Lombardi, by the way, an unaccredited analyst with Canadian soccer. And then the assistant coach, Jasmine Mander, who Lombardi reported to, is removed from the team as well. FIFA launched an investigation into Canadian soccer as a result of this, and the dominoes have started to fall well beyond this. See, at first, the head coach, Bev Priestman, she decided that she was going to skip the opening match. She didn't want to make it look like they were using any advantage that they'd acquired from these two separate drone incidents against New Zealand. So she decides to sit out the opening match. But then TSN, which is a huge sports news network in Canada, drops this bombshell. Says Canada's men's and women's soccer teams have relied on drones and spying for years, sources say. Coaching staff and contractors working with Canada's men's and women's national soccer teams have been engaged for years in efforts to film the closed-door training sessions of their opponents, including during the women's gold medal-winning Olympic tournament in 2021. Damn! So this is not a one-time thing. Okay, this is a pervasive problem in Canadian soccer. You know, now all of a sudden I'm getting suspicious because the last 4 years for Canadian soccer have been fairly electric. They finished top of men's World Cup qualifying for the 2022 World Cup. Their women's team won the gold medal at the Olympics, which was the largest honor that Canadian soccer has ever been able to get on the men's or women's side. I mean, the last 4 years have been a big deal. And now TSN's saying that their sources are telling them that the drones have been spying for years for both the men's and women's side. I know I was saying earlier that apparently the drone stuff is not, the cost-benefit analysis is not there. It's not particularly helpful. Maybe I was wrong. The results on the field would suggest otherwise, that the Canadian national teams have actually benefited a ton from this. And if you dive into the TSN article, you get more deets. Because this is actually not the first time they've been caught. In July of 2022, they were caught filming a Panama practice session before a Women's World Cup qualifying match for the World Cup in Australia. A Canadian contractor was caught attempting to film a private Panama training session, and a complaint was made by the Panamanian Football Federation to Canadian Soccer and CONCACAF, the soccer confederation that governs the sport. One of the sources told TSN that Canada used a drone to record a U.S. training session on the men's side before a November 15th game in 2019 in Florida. The U.S. actually ended up winning that game 4-1, so the drones clearly aren't a foolproof a thing for the Canadian national team, but that's their sources telling them about one. They got caught doing another against Panama on the women's side. Oh, we're not done, by the way. 2 years later, Honduras stopped the training session in Toronto during World Cup qualifiers after someone spotted a drone overhead. Stop me if you've heard that before. And in hindsight, this quote is particularly hilarious from then men's head coach John Herdman, who coached Canada at the 2022 World Cup. He said, I'd imagine there's probably a lot of people in Canada that fly drones. And when a big team like Honduras turn up, I'm sure plenty of people are interested in what they're doing when they come into our country. So I know for sure we won't be heading into people's countries too early because with drones these days, people can obviously capture footage. Sounds like he would have some inside knowledge about that sort of thing. You've got to be careful in CONCACAF. It's a tricky place. Yeah, there are a lot of hard away days in CONCACAF, but what you probably don't think about is the Canadian away day because of the Canadian Air Force, specifically the branch of the Air Force that seems to be working for the Canadian FA. And if you want to just blame the people that were signed up on the national team to do this, according to sources, some staff and contractors were told the filming was part of their jobs and that they could lose their positions with the Federation if they did not go along with the demands. So they were actually being told it was part of their job to fly these drones, and that if they didn't do it, they could potentially lose their job in the first place if they weren't flying the drones. And it goes on and on like this. One of the sources told TSN that they flew drones over 2 of Japan's closed-door sessions at the 2021 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. Canada managed to tie Japan in the first game of those Olympics, which it, of course, went on to win the gold medal in, Japan being one of the main contenders for that gold medal. And the piece de resistance is that TSN apparently got its hands on text messages from the women's national team coach discussing secret filming of their opponents' training sessions ahead of games in 2022 against Costa Rica, South Korea, and Trinidad. I would recommend reading this article. It is, I haven't even touched on half of it. It is crazy, and huge shout out to TSN, because as somebody that actually went to journalism school and then just turned into somebody that talked about random shit on the internet, this is some A+ reporting. They did a hell of a job cracking this open. They got multiple sources inside the Federation to talk under a condition of anonymity. They got, the text messages supplied, email correspondences supplied, and they've got the Canadian Federation dead to rights on flying drones over practices over the last 5 years on the men's and the women's side, multiple occasions, which is crazy. Now, of course, the Canadian Federation has had to react to this. They have removed Bev Priestman from being the coach of the Canadian women's national team for the Olympics. She hasn't been fired, but they basically told her to go home, and they're conducting an external review. They've brought in some other people to conduct an external review of what happened and why it happened and how it happened. And I'm assuming, based off what we know now, that'll lead to Bev Priestman being fired as long as they find the same text messages TSN did, and just a whole reevaluation of the Canadian Federation. Now, my question was Jesse Marsh, the Canadian men's national team that made the semifinal at Copa America. None of that came up in the reporting that I saw. Maybe I missed something, but I haven't seen Jesse Marsh's name pop up or a mention of Copa America this year. Now, were they doing it based off of everything that we know? Maybe, right? But also, considering it's Copa America, I wouldn't be surprised if Argentina or Brazil had, like some sort of firing squad to take down drones that got anywhere near their practice. I don't know exactly how that works, but that just feels like a solid South American response. Maybe they have their own Federation Air Force. We could have these sorts of drone combats, like dogfights above practice to see who's actually able to film or not. I would be fully in favor of that, by the way. That sounds like a great way to settle this. But this did, of course, prompt plenty of memes, as it always does. And my favorite was Stu Holden, the U.S. Former international, who said a look inside Canadian soccer coaching education. And here we have, who I believe is John Herdman, the former coach of the Canadian men's national team, piloting a manned drone here, which, that's really the next step. I've been told that you'll get fired from the Canadian FA if you don't do that. This all unfurled in like 24 hours. It's crazy what happened once somebody pulled on the thread. And I would assume TSN was already working on some sort of story like this, and then this just threw some gasoline on the fire and made the story a lot easier. But yeah, the Canadian Federation has been busted in a massive way. This was a huge, pervasive problem that it seems Canada was at least gaining some significant advantage from, probably because they were literally filming every practice session. So you can glean more from that, I guess, than I would think.